welcome to Talking Shop. I'm Mike Jeffries. Tonight, we hope to take you beyond Strine to Wayne-speak. Wayne-speak has a particular flavour about it. I work for a radio station. I deal with it to a certain extent. I work for Radio 2UZ, which is Wayne-speak in itself, I suppose. I'd like to point out at the very beginning of the program that I'm not a word perv. I really don't mind. I understand that if a burglar ripped off your house while you're out watching a film or asleep because you'd put away a little too much Riesling, that's the way it is. And if we keep talking like that for the next 20 or 30 years, it will be officially the way it is. So really, I don't have a strong axe to grind in this. Hopefully some of the panel do this evening. And with me on the panel is the author of Wayne-speak, Mr. Harold H. Scruby.
Good evening, Mike.
Representing, I think, Wayne-speak in its earthiest form, Kev Kavanagh.
It's Grahame Bond, dead body.
An editor of the Macquarie Dictionary, Sue Butler.
Hello, Mike.
Mandy Salomon, who may represent, I think, Mr. Scruby's follow-up book, Tracey-talk.
Yes, hi viewers, how are you?
And perhaps another view altogether, Mr. Leo Schofield.
Evening, Mike.
Leo, welcome. Harold, why was there a need for Wayne-speak?
You mean Pacifically?
I think so, yeah.
Pacifically. Well, it evolved really over lunch, didn't it, Leo? We were looking at a few words I'd written down over the years, and we had a great chuckle about the way we tend to mangle the language. Leo put them in his column and was...
I must say I invited other contributions from readers of the Sydney Morning Herald and got them in great leaks, I must say, and the quantity inspired Scroobs here to actually put a book together.
Well, we did some field work last night, didn't we?
We certainly
I mean,
did.
to help out the ABC, Harold joined me on 2UZ and we invited people to phone up. And one of the things that I suppose we should point out early is we're not mocking.
Well, we're not mocking, we're just
benign,
we're observing. We're benignly mocking, I guess. We're observing, and we're doing it with cartoons in some cases.
Remember Shirley, who phoned and she said, I think you're taking advantage of the average Australian. But it turned out her real problem was she had a son named Wayne.
That's correct.
And if you'd called the book something else, you would have been reasonably happy with that.
Yes, well, Graham could have called it Kevin Chat or something.
Would you have done that?
I may have called it Rex-speak, but I always like Rex. Not only was Rex fabulous at tautology, but he was also wonderful at Rex-speak. I mean, I can remember a grand final where Rex was calling and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It's a veritable gladiatorial combat out here at the cricket ground. We've got young Blake playing back and full back. He's got the ball now. He's moving down towards the line. He's kicking with his right on the line. He's kicking with his right foot. My God, not many people know this about young Blake, but he's totally he can kick with both feet." That's Rex, wasn't it?
Sue, how liberal are you about this?
Oh, well, I think that I'm glad to hear that the title simply refers to an average Australian. I had a slight sort of feeling that Wayne might be picking on some sort of new class in Australia or some group of Australians. But if it just means the sort of mistakes that we all make, then I'm quite happy with the book. I think that there's always a slip betwixt brain and lip, and that this book is a sort of collection of the more interesting and humorous things that happen when the brain sends a message and the mouth sort of gets it wrong.
But these are entrenched slips, aren't they?
Oh, I mean, some of them are and some of them not.
Do you take my point that if we continue to say something in 20 years, if I'm still on the radio and I don't say something, then the pronunciation police will say, "Hello, I believe you've been dropping your Ks."
Well, if it ever got to the stage that the Macquarie Dictionary was the pronunciation police in Australia, I somehow don't feel that the Macquarie would ever have something as an acceptable variation of something.
You could be just being conservative there.
I know. It's very hard. I don't quite know how to explain the difference, why I feel that film is wrong and amateur is just an acceptable way of saying that word. Particularly when you're using it in combinations with other words. An amateur musician, you tend to sort of run one word into the other. We all do. It's a natural part of speech.
But that's different from film, which is victim of the cuckoo syllable, the one that has interpolated itself.
That's right.
Like nuclear. What's another cuckoo syllable? You got film, burglar,
Old-timers disease.
Old-timers disease. Now, you know, I can see that, though, can't
Well,
you?
that's another
Old-timers
sort of
disease.
mistake again. The syllable that creeps in, I think, makes you feel that it's an error. Alzheimer's disease is an attempt to make sense out of something that you might have heard. You're not very familiar with the term. I mean, we've got lots of medical terms which people mangle and garble enormously.
Is penis a medical term?
I don't know.
It's more of a musical term.
Sorry, Elton John's a wonderful pianist, isn't he?
Well, that's the word around town.
They go to great lengths to promote him when he comes out.
Yes. Oh, dear, I knew Harold was going to take this tack early on, didn't you? Mandy, what about your characters? You know, do they lapse into Wayne or Tracey-talk?
Well, I've got one character, Modesta Busamiani, who's the sort of girl. She talks like this, and actually she's more like that. She's very sort of innocent in that way, and she never learnt to spell at school, which is very much like myself. I never learnt to spell at school, and Modesta Busamiani, she actually tried to spell crustacean and spelt it C-R-O-S-S-T-A-T-I-O-N, cross-station.
Not a crustacean.
A crustacean is
what
a
about a
variation.
crustacean? Yeah.
But I feel a bit embarrassed actually looking at your book, and I'll just, whilst we're at it, Harold, because I have made so many mistakes in this myself, and I have been through high school and university, and I write for newspapers, and you know, I never learnt to spell properly, and I often in conversation have obviously picked up bad habits. Now, does that make me a bad person?
Yes, it does. I'm sorry, Mandy, and I'd like to leave you on that note.
And phone call from your employer.
Yes.
For years I've been spelling moot point M-U-T-E.
Oh,
They're the kind I like to not hear.
how mute.
But how is one to know? Because you don't ever see.
You've got the spell
moot
function
point.
on your word processor. You just
True.
push spell.
It's an American dictionary I'm using.
Oh, shame.
But one doesn't see these words written, and with the propensity amongst the younger generation not to read as much, then one doesn't have much chance of getting these words right.
Well, there's a particular problem with phrases like that. A foul swoop, a fell swoop is the other one, where you have a word buried in the phrase that has become obsolete in general use, and it just survives in that one phrase. And so people use the phrase without being able to attach any particular meaning to any of the little bits in the phrase. And then when they come to write it down or spell it, I mean, that's when you really have to anguish over what exactly you are saying. And so there again is this attempt to make sense out of something that seems to be nonsense. And so you change a fell swoop, fell's meaningless, into a foul swoop. Well, at least you know the word foul, even if it still makes nonsense of the phrase.
A bit like an obnoxious weed.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, that's a very happy one, because a noxious weed is obnoxious, yes.
Leo, you're sitting there being quietly urbane. What do you think about this?
Well, I'm somebody who uses words a lot. I mean, they're my methods of communicating with readers, and I tend to be awfully tidy about words. I think if people haven't come across a phrase, it's because they haven't read very much, and this may be a reflection on education in Australia, I don't know. But I do think it's very important to sort of handle language carefully. I think we do tend to mangle it, and the language as a consequence has very little romance and attractiveness about it. I think people, even very earthy people, can sometimes speak in a wonderfully colourful and rich way, the way the Irish do. I mean, they have a great respect for language, they have a fantastic literature, and words are part of their lives. Perhaps they're not of ours, but I use them to communicate, I respect them, and I guess I don't get impatient with people who mispronounce. I think it's slightly whimsical at times. This is not a sort of holier-than-thou publication. It's just a whimsical look at the things that people mispronounce, and hopefully it might serve some sort of purpose to tidy up our talk a little bit.
Do you get tense if people use the wrong pronunciation or the wrong word, which is really what we're talking about here, or mangling of the word?
Not as tense as I get if people smoke, for instance, which I think is really serious.
On a scale of 10, where would you place this degree of tenseness?
Oh, about 1. But,
about 1, right.
But I think it's useful for people to be able to express themselves. I think you often find people fumbling over an idea, and it's useful if they can use language very, very easily, just the same as they use their hands or their eyes. I mean, it's there to use to communicate with, and if you don't have a grasp on it or a sense of its meaning, then you're going to be feeling, I think, a little down about that.
Well, I received something from the Victorian Education Department recently, and there was a chap there who was high up in the echelons of the Education Department who is now espousing that the word use Y-O-U-S-E, the plural of you, I presume, should be part of the curriculum. I don't know if this is good. I think what's happening is that when we were at school, they were very strict, and they tried to make you understand grammar and syntax, pronunciation. And I think today they've dropped all that. Well, it seems to me that they have. And the other influence is that you've got television, which is a one-way medium.
Oh, that's
children
right. Blame the television.
No. The children do not talk back to it. They don't sit around the table as much as we used to.
There are probably kids out there right at the moment saying, get off.
Yeah, that's right. They're talking.
Well, they shouldn't be awake at this
They're
time.
exposed to the sound of words rather than the sight of words, and this is exactly Sue's point, that they hear something and then they attempt to put some sense on it, you know, and acupuncture becomes aquapuncture because they can actually make sense of those words, as you said earlier, Sue, I think.
Yes, they're identifiable items that you can split up acupuncture into puncture, which is something you're familiar with. Acu you're not familiar with at all, and so the next best thing you go for is aqua, because there are lots of words that start with aqua. And so that makes it a more familiar item, particularly, again, when you come to write it down and spell it. I think that I'm all for defending, you know, the correct thing as well. It's a pity, though, that mistakes in language, people use them to beat other people around the head so much.
It's always been a class thing. Accent is one of the things that has been used by the British to suppress the lower orders.
That's right, so that you can instantly identify.
And you can slot into class relative. I mean, it's not so much so in America.
This person is acceptable because they say acupuncture. This person is unacceptable, whatever their ideas and thoughts, philosophies and notions might be, because they say aquapuncture.
I've also heard it as actopuncture.
Is that where you get Muhammad Ali into
There are
beat-ups?
some words that everybody has seen, written like always, which is pronounced by some people as always. They skip over the L.
What about all right?
Always.
All right.
All
Well, there
right.
you see, I think that you get into the realm where you become pedantic. People don't make the distinction between spoken language and written language, and they expect somehow the spoken language to match up perfectly with written language. And I mean, if you really said things as you sort of learnt them in kindergarten with every syllable enunciated and so on, you'd sound crazy. You know, nobody would listen to you.
It would be pretty arch, I think, to do that. But on the other hand, I think one has to accept that all forms of sort of colloquialisms enrich languages. And I mean, we're not talking about colloquialisms, vivid expressions, things that bring a language to life. We're talking, I think, just about a kind of slovenliness, really, a lot of the time.
Yeah, but I make a living. I make a living out of a character that mispronounces everything. Kev Cavano. I mean, he's a butcher and he's meteorologically sound because he is a member of AA, which is Abattoirs Anonymous, you know. And like Mandy does.
But are you mocking that character?
Well, yeah. No,
It's the
I mean, what I
basis
do
of
is I
humour.
find it funny that I can perform a character and then suddenly turn on the news and see a newsreader or my wonderful story of a disc jockey, if I can do that
Do
briefly.
you story of the disc jockey?
A great character. We arrived in 3BO Bendigo, and the disc jockey, it was Gary McDonald Rory myself, the disc jockey came in and he said, okay guys, it's great. He said, I'm going to play a bit of a record, then I'll interview you guys. Okay, no worries. I said, great, okay, fine. He came out of the record and he said, I just do radio ID. And he went, hi, this is Jim Henderson on 3BO Bendigo. We've got some crazy guys in the studio. He said, not a bad voice, is it? He said, I go to the Max Rowley School of Voice. So he had two voices. He was a man with another. He was playing a character on air like Mike does.
Grahame,
Go on, be the one you're on air. Go on. Go.
Do your on-air voice. Do your on-air voice.
What
I always
about Paul Keating? Now, there's an articulate, intelligent man. Why does he get on television and say BHP and
He's a
then
Catholic.
anything? I mean,
Yes, do you think
why
that's
does that?
Catholic? That
Is
the
it
Catholic
Catholic?
theory of
I don't
saying
think
hate.
What about Barry Unsworth? I've got a theory about Barry Unsworth. Barry Unsworth's lips never move. I think someone's got their hand up him working him like a puppet. You know, I think
giant
actually when you
Muppet
really
head.
look, no, he's not a giant Muppet. He's a huge Cabbage Patch Kid.
Yes, well,
Tell me,
Barry
Sue,
Unsworth.
just going back to a point that Harold made earlier, and have you spent all your life in the halls of Academy?
Oh, well, I don't know that you would call dictionary publishing, you know, the Halls of Academy. It's a separate little nook on its own.
You've lived,
But
though. I
certainly,
mean, you've mingled. You know street talk, do you? See, the reason I ask, there used to be this sort of thing that Harold was talking about at school, where you learnt your syntax and grammar, and really it was very rigid. Then along came the 60s, and along came Miss Johnson, you know, who was a flower
Your
child.
friend.
And she said,
rice and lentils.
and she said things, as Randy Newman, the songwriter, is sort of interested in this. She said, if you think it's a poem, it's a poem. And along with that school of thought came, look, we don't want to regiment you into spelling your words all the same way. We're not here to straitjacket little minds.
No.
And I think maybe a lot of people got
what you
confused
say,
as a
not
result
how
of
you,
that.
2
not
plus 2
how you
became
spell
5.
But don't you think we went a little too far the other way?
Oh yes, I agree entirely. And I think that there is now a move back. Again, it's so easy to fall into the trap of when I was at school, everything was done properly.
Right.
And, you know, when I was at home, when I was young, we lived in a brown paper bag and we got up at 1 o'clock in the morning and went to bed at 11. There is the
Luxury.
school equivalent of when I was at school, the teachers slapped us over the wrist 8 times every day and I had to write out, you know. And really, you know, school is not, I think, as bad as, or as lax as a lot of people want to think it is. However, I agree there was that trend, and I think there is now a trend back the other way to take some account of spelling and to be more careful. And I think that sort of care for words and carefulness in what you do is a difficult thing. It's hard. It's hard to not just write down the first thing that comes in your head, but actually go and look it up in a dictionary. And I think that there is a move back to encouring children.
So do you think
indeed
use will enter the
demanding
language
that they
now?
do it.
Will use enter the language, or is it now standing a lesser chance?
Well, you've picked on that example. I don't think use
It's very
has, I
widely
hope, been held.
used.
On the other hand, there are other things which make people just as cross, which I think are just as perfectly reasonable and have a good chance of success. For example, there is the use of they to avoid his and her.
Yeah.
Now, I have now dropped into the habit of doing that. I don't even think about it anymore. It works perfectly. It simplifies so much. It is such an easy solution to such a difficult problem.
So also like theirs for the plural, there's 2 of them.
He will go and look up, I can't think of an example, but for theirs, for 2 of them, yes.
But that's
that
becoming
use of
very
they and
common.
theirs, I think is perfectly acceptable.
Yes.
But you'll find a lot of people get very upset about
Yeah,
that.
there are 2 of them.
But the spelling and the pronunciation are 2 different things, aren't they? I mean, I
Yes.
love hearing some of the wonderful and idiosyncratic ways that Australians pronounce these words, and it's what goes up to make the dialects of the country. You know, people talk about the southern accent in America, or with great affection about the Bronx pronunciations, or whatever. Surely we should be allowed to have the same degree of diversity and enjoy...
What about your accent, Mandy? The Adelaide accent, where you swallow all your L's. You're a schoolgirl, aren't you?
Well, I've since been to the June Daly Watkins School of Elocution. But before that... But before that, yeah, well, we always used to swallow the L's. Inganelg.
Yeah.
But we did always in Adelaide say dance instead of dance, school, pool, which we associated with the Philistine Easterners.
And what about now when you're living in Melbourne with Helicopter and Melbourne and
Daryl Summers, who's you pointed out was the prime
he is
mover
very good at that. Now he'll award a record album to Malcolm, but he'll come from Melbourne and he'll get up in a helicopter and turn on the television.
On the other hand, he'll go out when it's hot to be a little cool on the balcony.
Yes. And he knows Alan and Ellen, but we don't know which sex they are.
That's right. We didn't do that story yet, did we?
Would you like to do Alan and Ellen?
Well, this is actually Clive Robertson's story. He swears to me that he was watching a quiz show from Melbourne one day, and there were 2 contestants and an MC. And,
from Melbourne.
From Melbourne. And one of the contestants was named Alan. He was a male. Bit of tautology there, wasn't it? The other was, for effect, the other was named Ellen. So consequently, the male was consistently called Ellen. Ellen, you've done well. And the female was Alan, thanks for coming on the show.
Yes.
So if you had the vision off, you really wouldn't have known what was going on.
And that is becoming more and more, as we have the mass communication, you notice it a lot more, I think, with the... You can almost pick when someone's from Melbourne, I think.
What about, I think Sydney's really...
Sydney?
Sydney. Now, Sydney speaks very quickly.
We don't have any idiosyncrasies here, do we?
AQI, Australian question inflection, I think, really came out of Sydney.
I thought that came from Queensland.
No.
You mean good job working out well,
Hello, is everything okay?
The rising inflection, yes.
Really did.
Came
And
from
of course,
Bali.
New Zealand's got a big problem because, I mean, New Zealand's got strange vowels. We have a, e, e, o, a, and they have a, e, 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 e. And of course, whoever discovered New Zealand must have had a cleft palate.
Wasn't it
I mean, I'm sure
terrible?
he said we're going to have a bridge over there and have a fish and chip shop.
And
And
scum
I
milk.
could explain the American thing for you too. Why the American, how it's basically the structure of the face with the Americans. If you notice, I actually found out why they have so much teeth and they actually speak like that. You try saying "Have a nice day" that way. Just do it this way. Have a nice day. Have a nice day. I worked out why. I talked to an American gynecologist. Apparently, when American children are born, they want to use the forceps. They don't want to damage the brain. They pull them out by the nose.
Oh, is that what it is?
That explains a lot about speech.
I suppose it does.
So yes, we're moving into more of the mangling, aren't we? Do you think?
Yes, there's the evolution thing. See, one of the banes of my life is the evolution of the language. A bane of my life is kilometre. I mean, here I am. I'm still bravely saying kilometre. The metric conversion, Gough came on, it's kilometre. Well, I believed him, even though I used to say kilometre before we had the metric thing.
Yeah.
So I say kilometre. It makes sense to me. I do not say kilogram. I do not talk about colossicals.
That's right.
So it's reasonable to say
Yes.
kilometre, but everybody says kilometre. What am I going to do? Am I
They say kilometre because it's deemed by the ABC that that's the way it's pronounced. They have their
Well,
own
I don't think it is it?
It's
They
deemed
have.
by the ABC because it was deemed by the Metric Conversion Board. And
No,
I
it's
mean, we had
kilometre.
the same problem. Kilometre,
Kilometre it is.
sorry, yes, kilometre is approved.
So if we watch
kilometre
Richard
is not
Moorcroft every night, we're bound to learn the language and it's correct. And
Are
we'll
we?
perform.
I don't
Is
know
that
about the
the
metric
We always
conversion.
said
I
they
don't know.
wouldn't win that one. That's a classic case of trying to impose a theory on the language. Kilometre existed before the whole conversion.
Have
thing.
you
We're
given
really-
up on that, have you?
Aren't we
Oh, no,
digressing?
we say in the dictionary that it's deprecated, but we don't, our hearts are not in it.
Aren't we digressing a little bit where Wayne-speak was originally more the mangling of the language, like John Brown, resigning under the Westminster system.
Or hostable.
Or the hostable, you go to a
You're cooking the
hostable, or you meet an anaesthetist and...
Yeah.
Remuneration.
Now, there you are. Now, remuneration. The Herald, where Leo works, is remunerated, prints remuneration. And it's not once, it's many, many times. Now, does that mean that the sub-eds there, Leo, are illiterate? Or they're just...
Well, it could.
But not being remunerated properly?
You're not ruling that out entirely.
Not really got it. But I mean, I think it's somebody who just doesn't understand that word and it keeps getting through it because the pronunciation makes it seem as appropriate. If somebody is checking that word and that's the way he says it, then that's the way it appears to be spelt. I mean, there's no sort of check on it at all.
I always thought Athenius was an Athenian nurse.
Yeah, originally. From lesbian... She was a lesbianese.
You have a lesbianese character, don't you?
Yes, well, Modesta Pusamiani, her best friend, is called Tiziana Mahbub. And that is her real name.
Of course.
But she is Lesbianese, yes. Tiziana Mahbub.
That's the kind of food you get when you go to your auntie who never married serves you lesbianese food, doesn't she?
I don't know. I'm more into Vietnamese food,
No, vitamin
Oh, Vietnamese food.
Or
Yeah,
Vietnamese.
Vietnamese.
Bruce Ruxton likes Vietnamese. No, sorry, Vietnamese. He also likes he's. It's his own fault. Have you ever heard that? It's his own fault.
Oh, yes.
And Sri Lanka. Have you heard of Sri Lanka?
Sri Lanka.
They're nice.
Have you heard about the Vietnamese nightclub owner called So Su Mi?
So to me,
I suppose we're getting back to differences again, aren't we?
Americans with the fanny
Yes,
packs.
a fanny pack.
In America, a fanny is your backside, your bottom.
What we call a bum pack.
Well, if you ski in America, at the top it says, watch your fanny pack. But Americans are funny too. They add things on. They get off of buses and they go in back of houses. They don't go behind a house. They don't get off a bus. They get off of a bus. And they dove into swimming pools. Have you noticed that, Leo? Americans dove into swimming pools. I dove into the swimming pool.
And they never use a short one if a long one will do. For example, they have an automobile in the garage of their condominium or apartment. It's never their flat.
They don't have a flat, no.
No, that's
Unless
right.
the car stops on the road somewhere.
That's right.
But I find
They take an elevator. They don't catch the lift.
You have to adapt. I mean, when I try not to do tomato and all that to get service. But in America, I always find the difficult thing is, on phone conversations, I normally get there and I say, okay, I'll give you a ring. And they say, you give me a what? Oh, you give me a ring, we're getting engaged?
And you go to the bathroom, don't you? You don't go to the toilet.
I mean, I think that's fine because that is an idiosyncrasy of language that we understand to apply to a certain nation. And I mean, we can all lapse into doing our American accents. I think what we're dealing with really in the Wayne-speak thing is a serious sort of block to communication. I mean, I really believe that. I think when people say things, I mean, you guys, both of you, Mandy and Grahame, have been talking about making comedy out of people's mispronunciation. So I guess the natural flow on from that is that it is somewhat comic when people mispronounce. I mean, a woman told me recently that her daughter was looking especially good since she put a wrench through her hair. Well, I mean, she obviously meant a rinse, but I mean, I couldn't help burst out laughing. The idea of the wrench was extraordinary. But I mean, it is a faintly comical thing, and I think it's useful for people not to turn themselves into clowns if they can help it. I mean, one acknowledges that language is an evolving thing and whatever, but we laugh about it. But at the same time, there's a person at the butt end of that joke who is looking a bit silly, hopefully, and it does work in the class structure way. I mean, if somebody goes in and starts saying those mad things at a job interview, somebody might say, oh, well, yeah, he's got an HSC, but I think he bought it for 2 and 6, you see. I think these sort of inbuilt approbation and disapprobation factors can start working when people do it. So I think it's useful for people to concentrate on speaking reasonably well. They communicate better and they give a better impression of themselves.
Well, on that point, then, do you find, when you do your show, that you have Kev Cavanas in the audience?
Oh, well, of course, but I mean...
they laugh aloud.
But do they laugh along with you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, because they can see all that. I mean, it's not just Kev, it's you know, Darbos and people from wherever you want to do, far north Queensland, whatever you're playing, yeah. But I'm working off, my observation is listening, you know. I mean, there's a whole other area, like the way we punctuate other people's conversations. Here at the moment, we're interjecting, etc. But if you take Australia, and my observation is this, the telephone, and you take away the conversation on the other end to convince the person at the other end of the phone you're there, you fill in, you go, yeah, car, yeah, no, that's good. Now, young reporters, like, I can't remember Wonderworld when it started, young reporters would be there and you'd hear them off screen going, car, you did it.
Yes, getting right in there.
What about the aspirate? The aspirate is my favourite.
The H.
Isn't it interesting? Now, the H is just nowhere else in the world, perhaps in Northern Ireland, I don't know, but you don't hear H anywhere in the world, and yet there's not a telecom woman in Australia who doesn't say H. Now, at the same time...
That, by the way.
Yes,
I don't necessarily agree with this.
The same time, the people who say H are more likely to say huge or humid or human being. Now, why is that? Why? I mean, there's probably a lot of logic in saying H because it is an aspirate.
Why is this, Sue? Why is it so?
Oh, dear. I think we should ask Kev. I mean,
No, not being a Catholic, you know, I didn't do H at all. I just dropped H totally and go horrible.
Yeah,
well, of course,
it's horrible.
The telecom situation is one in which people are deliberately trying to emphasise the letters that they're getting
I think
across.
you should be just grateful that you got through to the lady in telecom.
Yeah, that's true. That's
whereas the other words you're talking about, human and huge, words that are turning up in conversation in sort of elided forms, and the start of them gets lost. I suppose the is a little bit of an effort, and so you tone it down. So in conversation,
has it anything to do with laziness? I mean, my theory about Wayne-speak is that it all derives from basic laziness.
Both laziness in pronunciation and in a sort of mental laziness.
At one of the Queen Street fairs, he went up to a little store, a charity store, where they were selling quiche. And he said, I'll have 2 of them quick Lorraines, he said. Which I thought was a quick Lorraine. Well, I mean, I can only put that down to laziness because the word is heard all the time. I mean, it is heard all the time. I mean, it's not as if he hasn't encountered it. I mean, you hear about Balmain boys and quiche eating. I mean, it's a word now that people use, and it's not a remote or a snobby word, and it's just sheer laziness, perhaps, that's prevented him registering the pronunciation of that word. So, I mean, he looks a bit of a galah for saying it that way.
Harold, are there any great examples that we've left out? The one I think of is but.
Yeah,
she did a good job, but.
But, yeah, it's only me, but.
Yeah.
But has become very, very prevalent. If you listen for these things, you'll hear it at least once a day. Why do we finish sentences with a conjunction?
Well, it's part of the interrogative thing, isn't it? It's inviting you to join in. I think you know, as you pointed out last night when we were talking about it, it's the, it looks nice, doesn't it?
Yes,
you know,
that's the inflection.
In fact, you don't even have to say doesn't it. The inflection will do it for looks nice. You know, inviting you to come in and say, yes, it does.
Do you think but is more of a punctuation? It may sort of indicate to the listener that you've finished your sentence.
Yeah, it's a little flag. I've finished speaking, you can speak now.
We've got others that people finish sentences with, you know, and that. And that is very, very prevalent.
Very Cockney, though, isn't it?
And that, yeah, I suppose. And that,
but, right,
people finish right. Right is interesting. When you're talking to some people, they say they finish a sentence with right all the time. So they're sort of reassuring you that what they're saying is correct. Or they'll say okay at the end of the sentence. You know, I was there yesterday, right? Okay. And then you've got like. Like's very Cockney. And of course the Trevor speak, which is NZ, that's A. People finish the sentences with A a lot.
And in Queensland.
And in Queensland, yeah.
But I don't mind that. I think that's all fine. I think what the only difficult area is when people do make fools of themselves by saying something the wrong way around when it's a simple matter of registration. It's not a genuine mistake like the bloke that said he'd been evacuated from his flat. That's what you said earlier about searching for the word and kind of making it up from things that they know to be
Yes, I've got a whole lot of medical ones here. Bury an enemy, for instance. A blocked station tube, riveted uterus, and an elegy. I mean, these are, that's right. Yeah. But things like the bury an enemy, where you've tried to make sense of something that's unfamiliar, I think that shouldn't be mixed up with variation, personal choice, like Riesling. I think that's just personal choice.
What about
but mistakes, yes, we should try to get rid of those.
What about Bjelke Petersen? That always used to fascinate me. You know, Bjelke Petersen is a Scandinavian name. Bjelke, but it's very, very simple to say. The J is always as a Y in Scandinavian. And yet, you always heard this Bjelke. Now, why was it Bjelke Petersen?
Why was it so?
Because that's the way it was spelt.
Well, no, it's
I mean, we're arguing that people should pronounce as they're spelt earlier, and that's the way it was spelt, and that's the way people... I think that's fine.
But if it was spelt that, or if it were spelt that way, Leo, it would be B-E-J-E-L-K-I-E,
well, I mean,
not Bjelke.
You're being arch.
Am I? Yeah, maybe.
Yes,
What about what? You didn't mention what. You know, he did it better than what I thought he would.
Oh, than what is almost common usage now, isn't it?
Yes.
You don't say than anymore, you say than what. And you say better of.
Again, this is sort of straying to grammatical errors and habits of speech. I think that a lot of the things you were talking about earlier, the endings and some of these sort of structural things creep into conversation because we do tend to fall into patterns when we speak. You've got so much in your mind and so much to get across that you fall into an easy formula to get the message through. And so it becomes convenient to use stock phrases, stock endings, stock, sort of sandwiches to put your filling in.
do we all Wayne-speak?
Wayne-speak is a game that anyone can play in the privacy of their own home, and we will now pass it to the viewer to play that game. This has been Talking Shop. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me on Talking Shop tonight. Good night.
Next week, Talking Shop tells some train tales. And what better person than ABC Managing Director David Hill, who knows a great deal about trains. Also on hand will be ABC presenters Mari Nicholson and Peter Ross. Next Wednesday in Talking Shop at the later time of 10:45. And also in a strange drama set in Prague, next on ABC, prior to World War I, a great story about a man who turns into a monster. That's The Insurance Man.